Hey, welcome back. Sorry about the audio on the last video. It was in my office, and so I was using my laptop, and it was pretty faint. Thanks for sticking with me. Hope everybody's doing okay. Let's see, it's early, no, it's the end of January 2025, whatever that means, whatever that means. But the earth is going through some interesting stuff, and Homo sapiens on this earth are going through interesting stuff. So for some people, the question might be, then why would I continue to focus on my own health and healing if everything feels like it's on fire? Literally, figuratively. And the answer that I give to people is your individual evolution is not too small to matter in the greater species evolution. That what happens when we evolve to a higher state of being is not because we're good. It happens because we have created a crisis that we then have to evolve in order to survive that crisis. Elizabeth Sahtouris is an evolutionary biologist of whom I'm very fond, and she has a paper that she wrote that's free in the public domain, and I'll also put a link in this video, and it's called Celebrating Crisis, like why we need crisis in order to evolve to our next step. And so for a lot of people that are feeling hopeless or helpless, we haven't hit a crisis point yet. I'm not saying that this is good news. I'm not saying you have to celebrate. What I am saying is that it's not over yet. Wherever we are going as a species, or wherever this planet is going, it's not over yet. And even though we're so little, right? Like as a species, individually, we're so little, but we're not insignificant. And so you continuing to work on your own health and healing does help. It does help our evolution. But the reason that I've heard it said to me, the reason that Buddhists call this the warrior's path is because it is painful. When you decide you want to wake up to your own experiences and to what's going on in the world, it hurts. And I think I understand on a personal level why they say ignorance is bliss. I don't entirely agree, but I get it. I get some of the why. So what we're going to treat today, which is what tested strong that we needed to treat, was I feel humiliated by the way I treat myself. Oh man. Ouch. The news is good that you can stop, right? Particularly, you've heard me say on this channel, is if we know the whole story, then the behavior makes perfect sense. There are a couple of reasons why someone might humiliate themselves, maybe by the way I talk to myself or by the way I treat myself. And if this speaks to you, then you know what it is that you're doing that feels humiliating. It doesn't mean you're a good person. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. I think everybody's got one of those. You know, you do this thing where you're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. But it's giving you some sort of comfort, some sort of promise of comfort. Those are actions, behaviors. They can be addictive behaviors, but it can also be like negative self-talk and how you hold yourself back from taking opportunities, because then, you know, this part of you that's trying to protect you, if you don't take risks and really go for what you want, then you can't get hurt, and that is protective. So I feel humiliated by how I treat myself could also be related to, if I'm the one hurting me, then no one else can surprise me. No one else can betray me. So if I'm looking out around every corner for where the betrayal is, or for who's out to get me, who's going to hurt me, or conversely, I am so cruel, so hurtful, so harmful in my self-talk, then no one could hurt me worse than I'm hurting myself. And this is, it makes sense, but it's also very painful. So especially if you're going through some sort of painful time in your own individual evolution, in your life, geographically, politically, you name it, spiritually, the idea that we would heap hot coals of self-humiliation onto pain that we're in seems crazy, but it is comforting. in a way where you're like, I hurt me and no one could hurt me worse than that. So I'm protecting myself from getting hurt by somebody else. If you don't know where this comes from in your own life, um, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you had the absolute best parents on the planet, and for that, I applaud you. I've heard that such things happen. But it doesn't have to come from family of origin. You can also be inundated with things on the internet, marketing, social media that are telling you that there is a problem, that if you buy something, that will solve the problem. And so sometimes we get humiliated by the way we treat ourselves, by like the ways that we're going to the gym, but we hate going to the gym and we haven't found joyful movement that we enjoy. So it's like, I feel humiliated by the way I treat myself because the reason I'm going to the gym is because I want to be in a body that's in a different shape than the one I've got, instead of learning how to love myself and then engage in movement that feels life affirming or joyful. And so for one person that might be double dutch, but for somebody else that might be chair yoga, and for somebody else that might be like wheelchair basketball. Like anything, any of those things is joyful movement if it brings you joy. But if it's one of those things where I'm sweating and groaning and aching on the Stairmaster because I need my body to be different than it is, this may be a part of humiliating yourself by the way you treat yourself. For you, you know. If you know, you know what it is. If this video does not pertain to you, cool, good for you. But if it does, or if it feels very alive, you can feel free to like it, share it, and also be here to get what we're here to treat, which is to say a little more peace in the present. That's the whole game plan. Yeah, there's something so sad about hurting ourselves this way, but there's also, it makes sense. So compassion is always the answer, and that's why AIT, or this type of energy healing, is also about discovery. So as you're moving your hand through the energy centers, if you take it a little bit slower, there's usually information that comes up, and it might be thoughts, memories, emotions, sensations. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it makes sense, but something you can add to this video is pause, stay at a certain energy center for a little while, get some information, write it down in a journal, and then come back to it and see how it makes sense. Because again, when we know the whole story, the behavior makes perfect sense. So for me, I'm going to put my hand at my center chest because of the grief. You know, this idea of I'm hurting myself to care for myself makes me very sad. Sad for me, sad for any other adult who's doing this by way of protecting themselves. So starting at the crown of your head, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. Now to your forehead, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your chin, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. Your throat, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. Both hands at your center chest, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your left heart, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your right heart, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your solar plexus, right where your rib cage would meet in the center, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your belly button, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your pelvis in the center where your hip bones would meet, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. To your left hip crease where your trunk and your leg meet, I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. to your right hip crease. I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. And then to your root, the base of your tailbone. You can sit on your hand from the back or just put your hand between your legs. You can also just hover your hand over your lap. Any of these work. I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. Now, if it feels like the energy has gone down, the disturbance or the distress, because you could hear a phrase like that and it would trigger more shame, right? Oh, great, I'm humiliating myself. So whatever it is that you were here to release, whenever something, the way we do this treatment in quick AIT, at least, is you get a number at the beginning. How strong was it? A 7, a 10, on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 is the strongest. We do a round like we're draining the energy of that phrase, the charge or the disturbance or distress, how it's stored in the body. And then we get a sense, like you're asking yourself, your deeper or wiser self, to give you the new number instead of like, what do I think it should be? So we're not using this, which is a tool, not your whole self. We're not using your intellect. We're using this just to interpret information. And so when it's a 2 or lower, instead of doing a whole nother round, which you can, especially if you have the time, what we do is put your hands in 2 stationary places. Again, if it's 2 or lower. And we repeat the phrase 2 to 4 more times. So wherever it feels like it's left, the residual. So if you need a whole nother round, you just rewind the video, do that again. If it's down to a 2 or lower, you find 2 energy centers. And for me right now, where I'm feeling the residual or what's left is at my right and my left heart. So I'm going to cross my hands like I'm giving myself a hug and say this phrase 4 more times, excuse me. I feel humiliated by how I treat myself. 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 Big deep breath. Let it go. The thing that just popped up for me when I was finishing that round is an example I give to my clients on a regular basis. When we do parts work or we're identifying the ways that some parts of us are protecting this system with dysfunctional behaviors, but if we don't know anything better, it's the best we've got. And the example I give to my clients is if you and I, 2 reasonably healthy adults, stumbled upon a 12-year-old with their finger in a 5-year-old's face being like, "You're stupid, shut up, stop crying." And the kid's just like bawling. The 5-year-old's just bawling and the 12-year-old's like, shut up. And I ask my clients, on whose behalf would we want to intervene? And most of the time my clients go, well, the 5-year-old, they're in so much pain. And I always say, how about both? Because if I can get that 12-year-old part feeling safe enough and I ask a question, what are you doing? What are you trying to do? And that part usually would say something to the effect of, I'm trying to get this little crying guy to stop crying. And I don't know how else to do this. And this is what works for me. So this is what I'm doing. So part of how we reintegrate and bring like tender compassion to these systems is by understanding that even the part that's trying to humiliate me in order to protect me has my safety and my best interest at heart. It just doesn't have another way. So we know we're getting into this self energy when we can discover that part and then go, you're just trying to help them, aren't you? Could I teach you a different way, right? We don't have to point fingers in faces. If you've got any kids and you've watched one of your older children teach your younger children how to do something and you're like, whoa, thank you for trying to help. That's not... whoa, hang on, let me intervene. This is kind of the same thing. These inner children in the way that we have to give them some tenderness. And this phrase's opposite is, I understand. why I treat myself this way, right? So this phrase is not, I love myself and I'm always kind to myself. It's just that, like, I understand why I treat myself the way I do. So rather than trying to fix it with a platitude or an affirmation, we're here to bring understanding. So I'm going to put my hand at my center chest, starting at the root, going from the bottom up. The phrase is, I understand why I treat myself the way I do. Now to your pelvis. I understand why I treat myself the way that I do. To your belly button. I understand why I treat myself the way I do. To your solar plexus. I understand why I treat myself the way that I do. Both hands at your center chest. I understand why I treat myself the way I do. To your left heart. I understand why I treat myself the way I do. To your right heart. I understand why I treat myself the way I do. To your throat. I understand why I treat myself the way that I do. To your chin. I understand why I treat myself the way that I do. To your forehead. I understand why I treat myself the way that I do. And to the crown of your head. I understand why I treat myself the way that I do. So take a big deep breath like you're filling up the space with this statement. Understanding can also give rise to compassion. Trying to understand why these parts are, why that inner critic is just ripping me to shreds, instead of going, God, I can't. So it's like I could meta shame the shame, right? I can humiliate myself and then beat myself up about the fact that I'm humiliating myself, and then I've just spun up into a new layer of self-humiliation. Or I can stop and just get a little curious about how this feels protective, how old I was when I started to need that. And of course, the videos that I put on this channel are meant to be a supplement to the inner work that you do with a trained professional, which I am, but I'm also not a therapist in this capacity. I'm just posting videos. So if you are looking for someone who does this type of treatment, one of the places you can go is onto Psychology Today, which is a website that has a directory of mental health therapists in your city, neighborhood, and if you live in a rural area but you have internet access, in your state, and you can be seeing someone virtually via telehealth. The thing that I am continuing to say to my clients, whether they're going through a good time, a hard time, is that their evolution, their personal and individual evolution, is not too small to matter in the grander scheme of the direction that we're heading as a species. And I mean that for you too. And so if this is helpful, I'm so glad. If it feels helpful to share it to someone, please do. And I'll be back soon with another video. Bye.